Hello everyone, FPL Raptor here and welcome back to another video on my YouTube channel. In today's video we have my Game Week 13 deadline decisions where we answer some of your final questions and dilemmas ahead of the deadline. If you do enjoy today's video, please do smash that like button, and if you're new around here, make sure to subscribe as well. But without further ado, let's jump into it. So guys, before we start the video, the most important thing to remind you is that it is a Friday deadline this week, 6:30 PM UK time. Brighton versus Southampton is the early kickoff on Friday evening. So firstly, please make sure to not miss the deadline. I will start my deadline stream at 4:30 PM UK time. Hopefully you can join me for all of it, and if not, some of it. And yeah, the deadline's at 6:30 PM at UK time, so make sure not to miss that. But that also means that this video will be slightly different because I, of course, cannot wait for the Friday press conferences before uploading, because at that point, we basically have the deadline stream coming. So I'm just going to answer some of your key questions and dilemmas instead of going through the press conference updates. And one of the main questions that I'm still getting, despite obviously sort of discussing it a little bit throughout the week, is JOAO Pedro versus Cunha. If you are to bring in one fresh this week, which one would you go for? And honestly, even if you have one of these and not the other, it's still probably a section worth watching because I'm going to discuss the pros and cons of bringing each of the players in. I will just say, straight up, at their price points, if we're talking about value as well as obviously what they offer, these are the two best forwards to own in FPL for me at the moment. So if I were to list the forwards, which I did in my Game Week preview video, if you watch that, they would be number 1 and number 2. So I absolutely love JOAO Pedro and Cunha. So if I am saying I prefer one of them, which I do slightly, that isn't to say that the other one isn't good. I think these are the top 2 forwards to own in FPL. If we look at the fixtures, I would honestly say they're extremely similar. They both play against newly promoted sides, 2 apiece. Southampton at home and Leicester away for JOAO Pedro. For Cunha, it's Ipswich at home and Leicester away. Outside of that, they've got 3 fixtures that you would still expect the teams to win. So for Brighton, they've got one trickier fixture in there, which is Fulham away, but we just saw Wolves beat Fulham 4-1. I do think a little bit of context needs to be applied for that game, but they're obviously a team that can be beat. And then it's Crystal Palace and West Ham. For Matheus Cunha, he's also got the West Ham away game, but then the other 2 are Bournemouth and Everton. So honestly, if I was to compare the 2, I think they are virtually identical, right? I don't think the Bournemouth game is particularly easy for Wolves. I don't think the Fulham game is particularly easy for Brighton. And then outside of that, there's 4 games that you would expect them to win. So if we're just looking across the next 5, I think they're extremely comparable. Where I think JOAO Pedro's fixtures are better is over the next 3. So the next 3 fixtures for Cunha are Bournemouth, Everton, West Ham. Whereas for JOAO Pedro, he's got the Southampton and the Leicester game in the next 3. So when we talk about entry points in FPL, we talk about when is the best time to jump on a player. I'm not saying this is a bad time to jump on Cunha at all ahead of 5 really good fixtures, but this is a better time to have JOAO Pedro. I would rather bring in JOAO Pedro now than say in Game Week 16. So if you are only going to own one, the entry point matters far less because you're going to hold them. But if you're telling me there is a chance that you bring in the other one very soon, well, then maybe entry point-wise, it's JOAO Pedro now and Cunha a little bit later. But I would want to really own Cunha for Game Week 16 and 17. The next thing to discuss after the fixtures is like how nailed they are in the minutes. And I have been saying for a while, and I do really still maintain this, that Cunha is the more nailed asset. And one of the major benefits of Cunha isn't even if you look at the data in the eye test, it's just that he always seems to be on the pitch for Wolves. And I do still maintain that. If you look at minutes per start, Cunha's minutes will be absolutely fantastic. He's played 90 minutes in basically every game this season, bar a couple at the start when he was coming back from an injury at the start of the season, and then also that Man City game when he just did so much running, and I think it was game state dependent that they just decided to make a switch for Cunha. So I think Cunha is basically a 90-minute man. Do I think JOAO Pedro is a 90-minute man? No. But I also think people are very incorrectly predicting his minutes that are saying he's a massive rotation risk. So we'll jump over to the FPL site. So this is JOAO Pedro's minutes so far this season. At the start of the season, which was the only point that we knew that he was, let me just zoom out a little bit, that we knew that he was fully fit. It was 81 minutes, right? Then 90 minutes, then 90 minutes. So you can see that when he is fully fit and available and he's got the ability to play the minutes, he was basically nailed on. Obviously, then we had the issue of the injury here, and then he's come back from the injury, played 25 minutes and then 63. It might be that to just make sure that he doesn't get injured again, yeah, maybe they just preserve him a little bit and the minutes aren't as good. But I just want to point to the fact that at the start of the season, this man was just churning out 80-plus minute games and he got back-to-back 90s. And those were in games when, yeah, he did a lot of running and you could have arguably given him some rest towards the back end of the game. So I actually think that JOAO Pedro's minutes, it's why I put minutes per start here. I think when JOAO Pedro starts, which will be almost every game, I don't think he's getting that many early subs once he builds his fitness back up. Now, how long that takes is a completely different question. The other concern is that Game Week 14 is a midweek deadline. So if you are worried about JOAO Pedro's minutes and him not starting every single game, if there is a game to give him a rest, it's arguably Game Week 14 or 15. Now, the interesting thing with Brighton is that their game against Fulham is on Thursday. So they play them Friday against Southampton and then Thursday against Fulham. So there's actually 6 days between the Southampton game and the Fulham game for Brighton. But then they play against Leicester on the Sunday. So my worrying concern wouldn't be that he's benched in the Fulham game. It's actually that he's benched in the Leicester game. And that would be a worry because then you're missing one of the better fixtures. All of that to say, I think JOAO Pedro's minutes are better than we're probably expecting. And I think that as a result, you still place Cunha in a higher category in terms of nailedness. But I think that JOAO Pedro's are better than a lot of people are saying. In terms of the data so far this season, JOAO Pedro's not really played enough minutes, in all honesty, to have a completely representative idea of how good his data will be. But we saw last season it was very good. And honestly, this season it's extremely good as well. Expected FPL points per 90, 5.87. Cunha's is 4.62. 0.41 non-penalty expected goals. Cunha's is 0.27. And then expected assists. I don't know that it will continue at this rate, but one of the benefits of Cunha is that he's so creative. 0.21 is pretty good for a forward, but JOAO Pedro's up at 0.31. His big chance involvement is almost 2 big chances he's involved in per 90. So the data definitely points toward JOAO Pedro here. It's just been elite. 0.72 non-penalty expected goal involvement at 5.7 million is a bit of a joke. And even last season, like I said, it was pretty good too. I will just say for both of them, they're both overperforming their expected data. So I think you need to temper your expectations. Cunha's off the back of a 16-pointer. JOAO Pedro's off the back of 2 12-pointers. It's just not going to continue at that rate. Neither of them will get enough chances for their teams that they're getting double-digit returns every single week. But could you see a situation where they are returning more weeks than not over this spell of fixtures? You absolutely could. But definitely JOAO Pedro, look at that. He's almost over double. Outperforming over double of what he should. So 10.22 FPL points per 90 versus 5.87 expected FPL points per 90. The only other thing outside of sort of data, minutes, fixtures is what they offer. So Cunha is on corners and a lot of free kicks as well as open play. You can see by the touch map that is just behind me that Cunha does take most in-swing and corners. He's taken a couple of outswing and then also he takes a lot of set pieces too. However, they're both on penalties, which is the major drawing point when you're bringing in a forward. If they're on penalties as well, that's amazing. We're expecting, anyway, we don't know 100%, but we're expecting both Cunha and JOAO Pedro to be on penalties. So putting that all together, these are 2 extremely elite FPL options at their prices. Like, they are both going to offer you so much. And I think in an ideal world, you want to own both of them. If you are telling me that you are only going to own one now for the next 5, I think it's a 50-50. I really do. But what if you're telling me that you're going to jump on one now and you might be able to own the other one in a few weeks? It's got to be JOAO Pedro for the entry point. Like I said, Southampton and Leicester in the next 3. And when you consider his 1.3 million saving, I just think I would marginally lean towards him. So if you want me to not sit on the fence and give you my opinion, I would bring in JOAO Pedro ahead of Cunha this week. But I don't think there's a lot in it. And I do think that Cunha's minutes will be slightly safer and that you might be getting slightly more reliable, consistent returns from him because of the talismanic nature of what he does in that team. I'm going to leave it there. Let me know, are you going to own JOAO Pedro, Cunha, neither or both for Game Week 13? So there are so many questions this week coming in around like how essential is Bukayo Saka? He's obviously doing very well in terms of FPL points. He's just returned a 12-pointer or a 13-pointer last week. He's in high demand. He's about to go into a slightly nicer fixture run now. Do we need to sort of break our teams to get him in? And the honest answer is no. He's not essential. No player in FPL is essential. But is this a really good time to jump on Arsenal? Yes. And I think you can look at fixtures. Fixtures are incredibly important. But I think the key thing is Martin Ødegaard. And since coming back, especially the last 2 games against Forest and Sporting, they've just looked different. Like Bukayo Saka even mentioned that he had a bit of a smile on his face when Ødegaard was back in training. And I just think that right-hand side functions so effectively with Ødegaard. The little link-up between Ødegaard and Saka is just unbelievable. And I actually think the big improvement is not only Ødegaard, and this is no disrespect to Ben White. Yuri and Timber is a baller. That man on that in that right back role in that game against Forest, the three of them were linking up so well. The good thing for Arsenal is, yes, Ben White is out, but as long as Yuri and Timber can stay fit, he is very, very technically gifted. He's got a pretty good engine, actually, going up and down that right-hand side. And he seems to have already built up some good chemistry with Bukayo Saka as well, which often can take time. But in that game, it looked pretty quick. So again, as long as Timber can stay fit, I just think that right-hand side now is so strong that Saka's returns will, if anything, only improve. And the big thing with Saka this season is we know how creative he's been. He's got so many assists this season. He's created 14 big chances, which is the most in the Premier League this season as well. So he is, by all accounts, the most creative player in the Premier League so far. But you want a little bit more for 10.2 million. You want a little bit more goal threat. And I just think with Ødegaard in the team now, a little bit of that creative responsibility has been lifted from Saka. By the way, he's still going to get lots of assists and he's still going to create because that is the nature of his game and where he picks up the ball and those wonderful sort of back post in-swinging crosses, and his passing ability is really good. So he's not going to stop getting assists all of a sudden, but I just think this puts him slightly closer to goal. And what I would encourage you to do to decide if you want to own Bukayo Saka is just watch the highlights from the Forest game, because he was in the box a lot. He had 5 shots in the box, and it did just feel like he was naturally a little bit closer to goal, and it was making a few of those runs because, in all honesty, who was finding Bukayo Saka without Ødegaard there? There was no one that had that ability to find that cute little pass in behind the back line where Bukayo Saka could then score a goal. So, yeah, I just think the Ødegaard back in the team, Timber playing really well at right back and linking up well with him, I think there are returns here coming up for Saka. I actually don't think the fixtures are as good as, say, like for a Brighton or a Wolves. But when you look at it overall, West Ham have really improved in the last 2 weeks. They've conceded less chances. Fabianski's been looking pretty good for them in net. But it's still not a bad game, West Ham away. And Arsenal do tend to do pretty well against West Ham. So I like that fixture. It's then a midweek game against Man United. We are struggling under Amorim in terms of we're still conceding a lot of chances. And I think that back three system with Bukayo Saka getting in between sort of the centre-back and whoever's playing left wing-back at that point, Dalot, midweek game as well, so Man United might rotate. That feels like a really good game for Bukayo Saka. Fulham, I still think, are a really good defence, but at the same time, again, it's Arsenal. They're playing very well. And then after that, it's Everton, Crystal Palace. After that, in 18, he's then got Ipswich, then it's Brentford. So that little spell from 16, 17, 18, maybe 19 against Everton, Palace, Ipswich, Brentford, is just a spell of games now that you really want to own Arsenal for. And to be honest, it extends beyond that into about game week 27 that Arsenal actually have pretty good fixtures. We can actually jump over to the FPL site and just look at Arsenal's fixtures, because I was gonna look at Saka in my team, but I don't have Saka yet, sadly. I will be getting Saka this week if you can't tell already. But yeah, it's that really nice run here, like I said, until sort of 19. Then it's Brighton, Spurs, Villa. Those three aren't ideal, but they're also games that, again, I think Saka in transition could do quite well. And then it's a pretty nice, I mean, honestly, you could keep Saka just indefinitely at this point. So he's just a player that's so consistent. The returns will continue to be so good for him. And I like the fact that Ødegaard's back. I like that link up with Timber. I do want to see a little bit more from his goal threat in terms of, if you look at his data so far this season, by the way, it's astonishing. It's really good. 0.36 expected assists per 90 is so high. 0.27 non-penalty expected goals isn't awful, but that would suggest that if he plays 90 minutes, you're getting a goal every 4 games if he performs in accordance with his XG, which is a little bit low. Now, what you have to remember with Saka is I think he's a good finisher, so I think it will slightly overperform his XG, and he's also on penalties. So maybe you might bump that up to once every 2 games, but it's still, you want a little bit more goal threat from a £10.2 million asset. So basically, to put that together, I do think Saka is probably a player that you would like to own now. Do you need to break your team to do it this week? Absolutely not. The next 3 fixtures are good, but they're not exceptional. And I think if you've not got Saka, you've probably got someone else like a Haaland in there, or you've got a Heung-min Son. And I think they are all fine options as well and could comfortably outscore Saka over the next couple of weeks. So yeah, I'm probably going to bring him in this week, but I don't think he's essential. So this is maybe a question we'll discuss in more detail next week, but it is a midweek deadline and it might affect your transfer this week. So it's worth probably discussing, which is, should more people be concerned about Palmer/Jackson being rested in the midweek game week 14 game against Southampton, ready for Spurs away the following weekend from a Chelsea fan? So if you don't yet know, game week 14 is a midweek deadline. And I've also included that game week 18 is a midweek deadline as well. I think that's the Boxing Day game on the Thursday. So yes, this is something to consider because if you've not yet followed Chelsea this season, in the Europa Conference League, they're basically playing an entirely different 11. So they've got like an 11 that they play for the Premier League games, and then they've got an 11 that they play for the Europa Conference League games. And that 11 that they've been playing for those Europa Conference League games have been performing incredibly well. There have been some big results. They're scoring goals. They've been keeping clean sheets. So yes, he could conceivably literally rotate the entire 11 for that Southampton game, especially given that it is an opposition, I'm not saying similar to the Europa Conference League opposition, but an opposition which should technically on paper be a little bit easier to beat. I would still be extremely surprised if there's mass rotation. The only reason I say that is Southampton showed against Liverpool, they're not pushovers, and this isn't the Europa Conference League, this is the Premier League. And I think Maresca is very, very aware of that, and he'll want to maintain what has been a very good start to the season for Chelsea. So I'm going to go out on a limb here and say, despite what a lot of other people are suggesting, and people whose opinions I trust around football, I don't think Palmer will be rested. Like, Palmer's not even been included in the Europa Conference League squad. He's played 0 minutes. And so he should be feeling pretty fresh. I think he is capable of playing for 1 week, and it's only 1 week, Sunday, Wednesday, Sunday. I don't think he needs to have a rest here. It's not like he's been playing every midweek so far this season. So yes, I think Palmer will be okay, but his minutes definitely drop in terms of expectations. And then Nkunku, only as recent as yesterday, played that number 10 role that Palmer plays extremely well and grabbed a goal. So Nkunku could comfortably sit in that position there for Palmer. Palmer might be on the bench, and if they end up needing him, he comes off. But I just think given it's a Premier League game, I just expect personally Palmer to play. And the thing is, you've probably already got Palmer, a lot of you. You're not going to bench him in the hope or prediction that he might miss that Wednesday game. You're just going to start him anyway. The only issue we've got is Palmer is the best captaincy option in game week 14. So we will discuss this next week, because I would ideally, unless you've got Erling Haaland, by the way, who's got a decent captaincy option against Forest at home, you probably would like to give Palmer the armband. But if there are any doubts around his minutes, it's very difficult to captain a player that you don't know that they're definitely going to start. So yeah, Palmer I think is fine. We'll discuss that maybe in more detail in a few days. The player that I would be concerned about is Nicholas Jackson. And that is just because he's not Cole Palmer, and he hasn't been playing the midweek games. I wouldn't be surprised if Nicholas Jackson gets a very tactical booking against Aston Villa this weekend. And the reason that I say that is I think Maresca, in an ideal world, would rotate him out for the midweek game, because as this person says, it's Villa and Spurs either side of that. Like, those are the fixtures they want their best players in, which is Nicholas Jackson. He's comfortably first choice. I don't expect Nkunku to take a lot of minutes off him coming up, but Nkunku is clearly able to play as the number 9 and also able to score goals as well. And at the start of the season, Maresca said he sees Nkunku as a number 9, not as a number 10. And whilst he has been playing him as a number 10 in some games, I just think it is absolutely feasible that Nicholas Jackson doesn't play this, or that he, again, tactically picks up that booking so that he can't play it. I think with the fact that there is a midweek deadline coming in game week 14, and that he's on 4 yellow cards, and then there's another midweek deadline in 18, and there are other decent options in the forward line, it is enough for me, and this is a personal opinion, it's enough for me to put me off Nicholas Jackson, but that may be the very reason to jump on Nicholas Jackson. That may be the very reason to go for him, given that people like me will be put off. And I saw James from Planet FPL said this. He's already owned Jackson, and he's buzzing that he owns Jackson because people keep getting put off by midweek rotation and by the yellow card situation. So it will continue to keep his ownership low because of these doubts. So you can look at it two ways. You can agree with me and say there are 2 doubts around his minutes, yellow card and rotation, which puts me off. Or you use that as an opportunity to jump on a lowly owned Nicholas Jackson. Because could I also see him just starting all of the next 6 and avoiding picking up that yellow card? Absolutely. He did it last season, by the way. He avoided picking up that yellow card for like 7 or 8 games. So, yeah, let's see. My prediction is that there's a good chance he doesn't start. I also do think if he does start, his minutes will be a lot lower. Like, I don't think he's coming off in the 85th minute. I think he'll come off in like the 65th minute. But 60 minutes against Southampton, honestly, even 20 or 30 minutes against Southampton, he might still return. So yeah, I think Nicholas Jackson and Cole Palmer are both fantastic. And in an ideal world, I'd like to have Nicholas Jackson. There's just enough to put me off. Let me know if you agree or disagree around rotation for Game Week 14. And at least once we see this, it might give us a bit more of an indication for what happens in Game Week 18. So every season, there are a lot of questions around sort of diversifying your assets and not putting all of your eggs in one basket versus putting all of your eggs in one basket. So I thought I would have a little bit of a chat around it because I think it is very pertinent at the moment with a lot of the players that people are considering. And also it's a bit of psychology involved here as well. So the question was just, what are your thoughts on diversifying your assets? The example that this person gave is that they want to bring in Nicholas Jackson, but at the same time, they've already got Cole Palmer and they're thinking they don't really want to double up on the Chelsea attack. And I've also seen a lot of people that really don't like the idea of double Arsenal defence, or, as we've seen with like Let's Talk FPL, triple Arsenal defence, because if they score one goal, or if they concede one goal, then all of a sudden you've wiped out 3 of your clean sheets. So, what do I think about diversification? I will just say there is a psychological bias. So there's a cognitive bias, which has loads of research behind it, called diversification bias. And this is the tendency for human beings to want to spread what we call like limited resources evenly over a set of possibilities, even if it is not optimal to do so. So basically what this means is that as humans, we like to not put all of our eggs in one basket and try and spread the risk a little bit and hedge our bets. And this goes for every aspect of life. And I will caveat this by saying this is not financial advice, but in a financial setting, that often makes sense. If anyone has an investment portfolio, you don't usually put all of your money into one type of investment. You might invest in various different things and diversify your portfolio. That is usually very good advice. And in most aspects of life, being risk averse and spreading the risk and spreading and diversifying is normally a very good thing. But as this says, sometimes it's not the correct thing to do if you're trying to play or do something optimally. And I think that's when we bring it back to FPL. So I think defense versus attack is very different. And I think there is context to be applied in all of it. But if we start with something like Arsenal defense, double or triple Arsenal defense, the argument is, and I fully back this, by the way, that if you have 2 or let's say even 3 Arsenal defenders, 1 goal, 1 mistake is all it takes to wipe out 3 clean sheets. Like, I fully back that perspective, and that is truthful. The alternative is that you only have to get 1 clean sheet to get 3. So if you are looking at statistics and analytics, and it's not as simple as this, but I will simplify it, trying to predict if Arsenal are the most likely team to get a clean sheet in most weeks, which they are, the likelihood of Arsenal getting a clean sheet versus trying to predict 3 teams getting clean sheets and all of those coming in is more likely that Arsenal will get the clean sheet in most weeks if they have a good fixture than getting 3 separate teams correct in terms of if they'll keep a clean sheet. What I will say is that it's just emotionally very difficult, psychologically, because in a given week, you never know what will happen. And Arsenal won't keep a clean sheet every week. So in the weeks when Arsenal don't keep a clean sheet, you're very likely to get a red arrow because you're basically getting 0 points or not a lot of points for the 3 players in your defense. So if you have like Timber, Gabriel, and Raya, and they all concede and they don't get any attacking returns or saves, then that is already 3 of your players blanking. Versus, obviously, if you spread the risk a little bit, and you've gone for 3 different players from 3 different defenses, you might overall get less points, but in a given week, one of them might get a clean sheet. So it might boost your rank a little bit. But then, in the weeks when you get that clean sheet, you are getting a massive boost because there are very few other people that will get 3 clean sheets in their defense in a given week. So I would imagine that your green arrows might be greater, but your red arrows might be greater. So it's a very psychological thing, I think. It's to do with like risk-averse, risk-seeking, but also emotionally how you deal with FPL. Can you deal with big red arrows? If you can't, then triple ups on defenses aren't a good thing. But then you'll, like I said, likely get those big green arrows because it's much more easy, I would say, to predict if 1 clean sheet's going to come in. It's like more likely to happen than, like I said, 3. Where I think that diversification makes a lot of sense in FPL and why I think that I would probably do it is when we're talking about unpredictability. So would I want to double up on the Spurs attack when I don't know what I'm going to get in a given week from them? I'm less keen on doing that. Would I want to double up on like the Wolves attack when, again, as much as I think Wolves assets are good, I don't know in a given week if I trust Wolves enough to turn up and score goals. I probably wouldn't want to do that again. So I think diversification makes a lot of sense in FPL when there is a lot of unknown about what you are doing with your team. With Arsenal, I would say they are a known entity. We know they're a good defence, and they will continue to defend well. So putting all of your eggs in one basket with a double up on the Arsenal defence, it makes a lot of sense. I would go as far as saying the Chelsea attack feel like they are pretty consistent for me. They consistently score goals. They consistently get chances. So I don't really look at the Chelsea attack as being something you need to diversify. I don't think you need to only go for one. I think a double up is absolutely fine. The final thing I would say is if we are playing this game purely optimally and we aren't looking from a psychological perspective, I would say that double ups shouldn't be your consideration. You shouldn't think, I own Palmer, therefore I don't want to own Jackson, because they are individual players. Jackson doesn't have any idea that you own Palmer in your team, right? If you think that Jackson is the best forward in isolation, the fact that you own Palmer shouldn't affect that. And this is where I always fall down in FPL in terms of I struggle to wrap my head around this. Like, if I've already got Saka, I'll go, yeah, well, I don't really want Havertz then, because I'm not sure I want to double up on the Arsenal attack. They're two different players. If I think that Havertz is the best forward, I should bring in Havertz. If you think that Solanke is the best attacker and you've already got Son, go and buy Solanke, because he is, in isolation, the best attacker. So I think that is probably the correct, optimal way to play it. I'm going to just circle back around now, because it's an incredibly rambly section that I probably should have prepared more for. However, I think the key thing you should think about is enjoyment of the game. If you do not enjoy the game with a double up in the defense, and my girlfriend FPL Pickle is an example, she often hates double up. She's like, oh no, because when that clean sheet wipeout happens, I don't really enjoy it. Well, then that's a good enough reason to just not go for a double up on the defense. If you would enjoy your weekend more, having a player playing for loads of different teams in loads of different games, because some people like that. They like being able to tune into loads of different games of football and have one of their players playing, then that's a good enough reason not to double up on Jackson and Palmer. So yeah, I'll leave it there. I quite like putting all of my eggs in one basket, but only when I'm confident in my decision. If I am really confident that Liverpool will score the most goals over the next 5 games, I'll go for a double up on the Liverpool attack. If I think Arsenal will keep the most clean sheets, I'll double up on the Arsenal defence. Let me know what you think of diversification. Let me know what you think of double ups and triple ups. And I think this is definitely something that divides the community. So guys, just to finish up, there's a few more questions that you've asked me that I think are applicable to a few people, but maybe don't justify their own section. So the first question is it worth doing Strand Larsen to JOAO Pedro on a free transfer? I'm reluctant to get rid of Strand Larsen given good minutes and fixtures coming up, but it seems everybody thinks that JOAO Pedro is much better. I will just say, as I always say, it's very difficult to predict in FPL. So JOAO Pedro could blank, Strand Larsen could go and score a hat-trick this week. But on paper, I think objectively, JOAO Pedro is a much better option than Strand Larsen. So Strand Larsen's expected goals per 90 is 0.24 so far this season, which means, and he doesn't get 90 minutes, but let's assume he does get 90 every single week. That means in every 4 games, he'll accumulate 1 XG. We've not seen much from Strand Larsen so far to suggest that he is an elite finisher, but even if he slightly overperforms that, we're looking probably then at a goal every 4 games based on the data this season. Now, the fixtures are about to improve, right? They've not been easy for Wolves, so maybe his data improves marginally, and let's say he bumps that up. But then we're probably still looking at a goal every 3 games based on expected data. It's just not really good enough. And even when you watch Wolves, Strand Larsen isn't massively involved. Now, the positives, he starts pretty much every game. In fact, he started every game, I think, this season. He is playing as the number 9. And as long as he stays in that number 9 role, Cunha and the players around him will continue to create for him. So, yes, he'll absolutely get goals over the next 5 games. But with JOAO Pedro, you've got significantly better data. I think you'll have very similar minutes. You've got very similar fixtures, but this week it's a much better fixture. And you've got a player on penalties. And I would say Brighton are a more consistent and just a better attack than Wolves too. I just think JOAO Pedro is a much better asset. Now, what I would say about this switch is 2 things. Firstly, you've got a free transfer, yes, but is there a better place to use it? Because as you say, whilst I think JOAO Pedro, sorry about the beeping outside, whilst I think JOAO Pedro is a better asset than Strand Larsen, if you've got like 2 fit defenders and you've got loads of issues elsewhere, that free transfer is probably better used on your issues in your team and maybe improving your defense. So yeah, you might have the free, but it might not be best used there. So I would still put it under the category of a slightly luxury transfer. But if you do just have a free transfer sat there, I'd be very tempted to make it. The other thing to note is it would be entry point dependent for me. What I mean by that is this week, JOAO Pedro's got Southampton at home. It's a great entry point for him. And I don't think that Wolves will do that well against Bournemouth. So I don't think that this week it's a bad time at all to make a switch from Strand Larsen to JOAO Pedro. But would I want to make that move in Game Week 14? No, I wouldn't really, because JOAO Pedro's got Fulham. It's a midweek game. I think that Strand Larsen could comfortably do a very similar job to JOAO Pedro. It's not really the week that I would want to own him. But then after that, he's then got Leicester. But then after that, Strand Larsen's got Ipswich and Leicester himself. So I almost feel like if you're going to make this switch to do Strand Larsen to JOAO Pedro, to make it less likely that it's going to backfire, I think you should probably do it this week, because I think this is the real banker fixture for JOAO Pedro. It's the one that you really want to own. So yeah, hopefully that helps you. I don't think you can go terribly wrong either way, but I do just think that JOAO Pedro is a better asset than Strand Larsen. The next question is, Mbeumo's numbers are bad. If he's your only route to Saka this week, do you do it, or do you wait a week despite his good fixture? What I would say is Mbeumo's numbers aren't bad. They're definitely not as good as they were. So this season he's 0.55 in terms of expected goal involvement. Non-penalty, that's down in the 0.4s. The concern is his goal threat in recent weeks. And I hold my hands up, this is an issue, right? So 0 XG against Everton, 0.09 against Bournemouth, 0.0 against Fulham. So 0.09 in the last 3 weeks. Do you remember the last time we had a player's data like that, by the way? It was Solanke, when he went and got a 16-pointer off the back of barely taking any shots in 3 weeks. He then obviously got 0.91 against Ipswich. He had 0.84 against Wolves, 0.64 against Spurs. So earlier on in the season, he had a lot more goal threat. There's obviously a couple of penalties sprinkled in there as well. His goal threat is massively down this season, and that would be the concern. What I would just point to, though, is his 2 big hauls this season are against Ipswich, where he got 2 goals, 15 points, Ipswich at home, and then Southampton at home, he got 14 points. His only other big scores are West Ham at home, 9, and Wolves at home, 8. There is a trend here. Those are 4 weak defences at home. Mbeumo is, and Brentford are, much better at home, playing against weak opposition. So this week against Leicester at home, it is a really good fixture for Mbeumo. So I wouldn't make the move this week. Now, when I'm looking at Mbeumo, when I look at those stats, they're not particularly promising. I look at that and think, yeah, at his price, considering some of the other options I could go for, I don't know that I do want to hold on to Mbeumo in the current position that he's playing. It is very wide. It's probably also enough to put me off captaincy, because as good as he has been in these easier fixtures at home, I've not seen a lot from him in recent weeks. But would I want to sell Mbeumo for Saka this week? I'm going to straight up against, not sit on the fence, I'm just going to say, no, it's not a move that I would want to make. I would wait 1 week, even midweek, for the Game Week 14. I think, so Mbeumo's got Villa away, Saka's got Manchester United. I'd rather own Saka for that midweek game. So yeah, I think from next week, from Game Week 14 onwards, you can absolutely look to sell Mbeumo for Saka, but I wouldn't do it this week. Next question is, what do you think about bringing in Timber ahead of Gabriel and Saliba this week? I honestly really like this. As I said, I think there's really nice chemistry between Timber, Saka, and Ødegaard down that right-hand side. I think that Timber from open play is going to get a lot of chances to assist Saka. We actually saw in the game against Nottingham Forest, he cut the ball back to Saka from about 6 yards out. Saka had a block shot. The XG and XA for that wasn't very high because of the fact that there were players in the way. But I like the fact that Timber's getting to the byline and getting the opportunity to feed Saka inside the box. It's going to result in some assists. We saw him pick up an assist in the midweek game against Sporting as well in the Champions League. So I think Timber will get attacking returns. But I think that Gabriel is still marginally ahead for me. We've just seen, again, against Sporting, a towering bullet header. The man is so elite from set pieces. And you would expect that his minutes are slightly stronger than Timber's. That being said, I don't expect Timber to miss many games with Ben White out. I think it might be like 1 in the next 8. You might expect him to not play. So I honestly really like Timber. And I think when you take into account price, he's very good. I would still order the Arsenal defenders, Gabriel, Timber, Saliba, Raya, in terms of who I would go for. I know that might be disrespectful to Raya. I know he's cheaper. He just doesn't make saves. We saw at the start of the season he does. But that was when Arsenal were really struggling defensively. They were conceding a lot more chances. Now that Arsenal are back to being a much better defence, Raya just doesn't make saves. So it's 2 or 6. So, yeah, I think maybe Raya ahead of Saliba. But I think Timber and Gabriel are the top 2. So I would still prefer Gabriel this week if you're going to bring in one. But if you're telling me that you have to take a hit to bring in Gabriel or you can bring in Timber for free, honestly, in that position, maybe you bring in Timber for free. I am looking in Game Week 15 or 16 dependent upon the update we get around Ben White's injury, and depending upon the minutes that Timber gets, I'm looking at bringing Timber in about 3 weeks. So that tells you all you need to know. I think he's a really good option. But don't be surprised if he does miss one game in the next 6 to 8. It's definitely plausible. And he could obviously get re-injured because he's not had a great injury record so far. The next question, sticking with the Arsenal defence. Would you sell Gvardiol if that is your only route to an Arsenal defender? I honestly think Gvardiol is one of the more underrated assets probably in the Premier League. The only concern is we need City to improve for Gvardiol to be a good option, because over the last 3, City are the worst defence in the league for expected goals conceded. How mad is that, by the way? City are the worst defence in the league. Over the last 6, they are 15th for expected goals conceded. So City are not defending well. They are not keeping clean sheets, and nothing suggests that that will start to happen. But Pep Guardiola usually finds a way. I will note that without Rodri, they will continue to be weaker than they have been in previous seasons. But at the start of the season, they were top 3 for expected goals conceded without Rodri in the team for the first 5 or 6 games. But they've just massively tailed off since then. So I guess all of that to say, defensively, it does worry me. But Gvardiol is so attacking, and he's so good for baseline bonus. He still tops the league this season for baseline bonus points. So as long as City do start to improve a little bit, he's really good for baseline bonus. He's got the attacking threat. In game week 12, he had 0.87 XGI against Spurs. He had 8 key passes in that game. The man is basically an attacker. So I would be really, really hesitant to make the move personally. I understand why you would want to, because Arsenal defence is so high in demand. They'll keep more clean sheets than City. But I think Gvardiol is elite. I would try to find another way to get an Arsenal defender in. Along with Timber, Gvardiol is, if I can find the funds, which is the tricky part, Gvardiol is a player that I'm tempted to bring in a few weeks. I think he's that good. And his minutes have been so good. He's played 90 minutes in every game this season, bar 2. And in one of those, he got 87. So yeah, I just think Gvardiol's that guy. I really do. And I think a lot of people want him soon. So if you've got him, I would personally try to hold on. But I do understand the temptation. And then the only other final question was, what are your final thoughts around captaincy? And I am... Sorry, what's the graphic I'm looking for here? It's this one here. I am hesitant to cover this in much more detail. If you've not seen my Game Week preview video, it was 20 minutes long just on captaincy. The entire video was like 40 minutes, but I did 20 minutes just on captaincy. So I'm going to try and limit myself to 2 minutes here. But I have updated the bookies odds in terms of chance of a goal as of Friday morning. And as you can see, the bookies now have JOAO Pedro, out of all of these options, actually as the highest chance of scoring a goal in Game Week 13 is JOAO Pedro. So if you wanted to take a punt, let me tell you the propaganda in favour of JOAO Pedro. JOAO Pedro has the second best non-penalty expected goals here, the second best expected assists. He is playing against the worst defence in the league for non-penalty expected goals conceded. And according to the bookies, he has the highest chance of scoring. And he is one of only 3 players on this list that has a good positional matchup. And what I mean by that is Southampton concede most of their chances through the centre of the pitch. All in all, JOAO Pedro is a seriously good captaincy option and is probably into my top 3 or 4 captaincy options this week. The only other 2 players that have good positional matchups in terms of the team that they're playing against concede most of their chances where these players operate is Mohamed Salah and Bryan Mbeumo. Bryan Mbeumo, the only thing I don't like is his goal threat is pretty low at the moment, and also Leicester have a new manager. So this new manager bounce, obviously Rude, he's not had long to work with the team. They might still concede loads of goals, and it might be that Rude wants them to attack, and this ends up being like one of those Brentford games where it's like 6-3 to Brentford, and it massively benefits Bryan Mbeumo that they have a new manager in place, because maybe Steve Cooper would have sat a little bit deeper with Leicester. But again, I don't know that, and there's a lot of unknown around it, so it's maybe put me off Bryan Mbeumo a little bit. Salah will always be a fantastic option. City have been awful defensively. City are very vulnerable on the counter. City are very vulnerable in transition, so it is a great fixture for Salah. The bookies have Palmer and Wood as the second most likely in terms of percentage chance of scoring. If you look on most algorithms, almost every algorithm this week has Palmer as the best captaincy option. So if you want to trust the models and the algorithms, Palmer is the captaincy option at the moment. I do think the likes of Saka, Son, Cunha could offer decent value as well as a captaincy option. But for me, if I'm to narrow it down, my 4 favourite captaincy options are Salah, Palmer, Mbeumo, JOAO Pedro. My captaincy armband is on Salah at the moment, and my vice is on Palmer. It is probably price bias. It's just a bit of trusting the premiums that usually are so very consistent. All 4 of those options are on penalties, by the way. In fact, is everyone on this list on penalties? Yes, I think everyone on this list is on penalties, so there's nothing to separate them there. But yeah, I just think Salah and Palmer are so consistent and so good. I'm going to leave it there because I've discussed captaincy so much this season. This game week, I'd love to know who you're planning on captaining. But for me, unless I have a sudden change of heart this evening, which is possible on the deadline stream, I'm probably going to captain Mohamed Salah. So guys, there we have it. That is my Game Week 13 deadline decisions. Hopefully that has been helpful in answering some of your final questions and dilemmas. Do make sure to tune into the deadline stream at 4:30 p.m. UK time this evening. But until next time, thank you very much. Bye-bye.